This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thanks for letting me do this for so long. You know, I used to really like Call of Duty. Bit of a back in my day, I know, which makes me sound a lot older than I am, but as other yearly franchises have found out, so many games in such a short space of time isn't such a good idea. At its peak, Call of Duty games have been wonderfully addictive experiences that combine a raft of engaging multiplayer modes with often thrilling single-player campaigns. But I guess the question I'm answering today is just how many games can be described as peak Call of Duty? And is that even a thing, or am I hanging on to wistful memories of a handful of games I played more than a decade ago that remind me of simpler times? No idea, but I'd love to find out. Hopefully, you might want to find out too. With 30 games to rank, we aren't going to hang around too long with each game, and so the worst Call of Duty, and kinda comfortably too, has to be Black Ops Declassified for the PS Vita for just being a shockingly terrible experience from front to back. Its single player can be blitzed through in under an hour, and the multiplayer is riddled with glitches and terrible touch controls. The maps are so small that you almost respawn on top of each other. Even for how rough Call of Duty has been recently, you can do so much better than this shit. Hey, do you want to play a Call of Duty game that really doesn't want to have multiplayer? Like, it's so afraid of having you shoot your friends that it's just got a short campaign instead? Well, that's where World at War Final Fronts comes in, developed by the same guys who would eventually make the Sniper Elite games. This is a Call of Duty game with zero multiplayer of any kind, and instead just a brief single-player story filled with busted AI that turns the whole thing into a bit of a farce. Sounds a bit like a Sniper Elite game to me. Activision were working on spin-off games as early as 2007, but Call of Duty Road to Victory frankly wasn't worth their time. It does have multiplayer, so you can get your friends involved, but it's got the vibe of a handheld CoD game for the PSP that prioritizes graphics over literally everything. It controls like a drunk driver, it's full of glitches and useless AI, and you wonder if the devs couldn't have spent like a little more time on the stuff that matters. Only a little. I want some kind of special award for Call of Duty Heroes for being one of the few games in this franchise to do something completely different. It's a real-time strategy game, which is a little derivative for a mobile game that came out in 2014, but honestly, I feel like it deserves a lot of credit for being a different kind of Call of Duty game. It's a little bogged down with microtransactions, and as you may expect, you haven't been able to play it for 5 years, so I can only be so kind. Moving quickly from one mobile game to the next, Strike Team is a game that suffers hard from an identity crisis. It seems to be attempting to bridge the gap to main console games and does so with its presentation, but also attempts to combine a top-down tactical shooter perspective with awkwardly forced first-person shooter segments, and they do not mesh well whatsoever. It's trying to have it both ways and ends up not really doing anything particularly well. But hey, at least you can still play it! Why is Strike Team still playable, but Heroes isn't? Hands up who expected to see the most recent Call of Duty game at number 25? Well, if your opinion of modern day Call of Duty is as burnt out as mine, Vanguard, being far from the best that this franchise can do, perhaps isn't such a big surprise. Activision have been running this series through the mud for years, and even though Vanguard feels like such a big downgrade when compared with basically every main console CoD game, it wasn't bad enough for Activision to care. It didn't sell well, but I think Activision are blaming it on the World War II setting instead of, you know, being shit. And having an even worse zombies mode somehow. How do you even do that? Hey guys, real quick, my channel has been approved for YouTube memberships now, so if you fancy supporting my channel more directly, you can become a member for as little as £1 a month and gain access to some nifty perks, as well as being featured on my channel page. Hit the join button below this video if that sounds cool to you. Thank you, and let's get back to the video. It's very easy to sum up Call of Duty Finest Hour, apart from confirming that it is in fact not the finest hour for Call of Duty. It's a slight spin-off of the very first CoD game that doesn't play too much differently, but has a fresh new storyline with 6 different campaigns that all interlink in some way. It's a hard game to rank since it's based on a fundamentally better video game, but the story is all sorts of fuddled and doesn't really help itself. It's strangely unsure whether it wants to be a realistic shooter or a bit more stylized, and it's not a great mix of styles. You're better off just playing the original instead. For me, the first sign that Call of Duty was falling by the wayside was when Ghosts came out in 2013. I've alluded to this moment a few times so far, but this is where major cracks start to show, with Ghosts acting as the first sign that Activision churning these games out annually might just be a horrendous idea. I don't want to be too harsh since I like some of the new ideas added to the multiplayer, but the single player has absolutely nothing to say for itself and can be walked through for what difference it makes. Some new multiplayer features aside, it's copy and paste Call of Duty. Boy, I hope this doesn't become the norm. Back in my youth, I distinctly remember getting the bus to school and a friend of mine whipping out what must have been an iPod Touch to play Call of Duty Zombies. This blew my mind for several reasons, but with the benefit of hindsight, putting out a standalone mobile game just so people can play zombies on the go was a genius move. It's bare bones as all hell, and the sequel is so similar that I'm lumping them in as the same entry, but I do love mobile games from the 2000s that focus less on microtransactions and just being a good game. Fans of nostalgia might want to remember back to the 2nd of May 2016 when the reveal trailer for Infinite Warfare became the most disliked YouTube video that has basically anything to do with gaming. Does this make it the worst Call of Duty game? No, far from it in fact, but it does hint towards the general attitude around this series taking a nosedive in the mid-2010s. The irony with Infinite Warfare is that despite the drastic changes and the introduction of interplanetary combat, it's one of the most fiercely mediocre games I'll talk about today. I think back to my time playing and it's just a messy blur of bullets that occasionally sharpens because of the really good zombies mode. All of this drama for a bland video game. Given how messy things were becoming behind the scenes, it's a miracle that Black Ops Cold War came out in any kind of playable state. There are a ton of arguments about the direction that this game should go in, and I think they were eventually resolved, and the result is a Call of Duty game which is strangely big on player options. Like, you can customize your playable character and make big story decisions, and there's multiple different endings, and you can tell that there's been a lot of effort put into certain parts of Cold War, but not everywhere. My eyes glaze over looking at the multiplayer, because I feel nothing. Activision sure does love a side story spin-off game. Finest Hour was okay, but not quite as good as Call of Duty 1, and sure enough, Big Red 1 is also decent, but not quite as good as Call of Duty 2. The main deal here is that Big Red 1 was released for consoles at a time when the main series was chilling out on the PC, and that does mean that the controls are built more with control sticks in mind, but we've also got the quirky side story which is more quirky than good. Especially nowadays, why are you playing this over the actual Call of Duty 2? You'll have a better time, I promise. In case you're unsure of how badly Activision has fucked around with Call of Duty over the last 5 to 10 years, Call of Duty World War II used Normandy Beach as a social hub to drop loot boxes onto. Yeah, there's a lot wrong with that, and Activision chasing that sweet coin was always likely given how brazenly everyone else was doing it at the same time, but it completely overshadows an okay Call of Duty game. It returned to a World War II setting for the first time in 9 years, but it's all over the place tonally, and when coupled with the loot boxes, you get the sense that the setting is being used as a gimmick and not with the kind of respect it deserves. This franchise was built on this shit, for crying out loud. Let me take a moment to tell you about the grand old time I had with the Nintendo DS version of Call of Duty Modern Warfare. I wasn't too sure about including ports, but I've talked about a few so far, so I might as well talk about how shockingly well Call of Duty fits with the DS's touchscreen. Mobilize is a smaller scale CoD game that tells its own story, so I feel more comfortable ranking it, but it controls really well and works nicely with its sleek story and pretty awesome online multiplayer. It's like Call of Duty, but smaller and portable. Oh, don't worry, I definitely didn't forget about Modern Warfare 2 from last year, and definitely didn't get confused when looking over a list of Call of Duty games and thought that this was a remake of that one awesome game from 2009. It's almost like naming an original game the exact same name as an older game for marketing purposes is fucking stupid. How's the game though? Yeah, pretty good. The campaign's excellent, but the multiplayer is full of terrible decisions. The gun customization is too much, and some of the maps give me a headache. Border crossing should be brought up on war crimes. What the fuck is this shit? Given the, at the time, ridiculous success of Fortnite and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, a Call of Duty Battle Royale was always on the cards. The trouble is mixing it in with the usual Call of Duty essence, since it would have been easy to copy over a lot of features from the competition, but Warzone is able to work in a few interesting features of its own. The Gulag is a nifty idea that gives unfortunate players a second chance, and if Warzone had a smaller file size, I'd play it a lot more often. Lucky it's free to play, because I'm gonna need to buy more storage after a 175GB install. Why are modern games so big? Hey, this shouldn't take too long. Warzone 2.0, the sequel to Warzone that acts as more of a reinterpretation, is basically the same as the first go-around with a few minor tweaks here and there. There's new maps and new weapons, and now you can swim without instantly drowning, so yeah, I suppose it's a little bit better. In 2019, Activision grew some pretty massive balls and decided to name their new Call of Duty game Modern Warfare. Spoilers for later in this video, but it's not as good as the game it takes its name from, but it is a lot better than some of the more recent offerings. The player choice here is really impressive, and I do like how you can have a more tactical approach to missions instead of going in all guns blazing. Not sure how I feel about white phosphorus being a kill streak in the multiplayer. Definitely feels like we've moved past this sort of thing. If Infinite Warfare was too many steps towards Halo, then thank Christ that Advanced Warfare exists. This one automatically loses a few places for me since Kevin Spacey is in here, but he does burn to death at the end, so that's nice. Advanced Warfare is the one with the exosuits, which help to give your character superpowers in the story and gave the multiplayer a lot more mobility and dynamism. Honestly, a really fun, if unrefined, Call of Duty game, which also has a dope stealth mission in its campaign. I love seeing developers screw around with mechanics like this. How's this for a turn-up? The best CoD game for mobile is actually the most recent one? Every fibre in my body doesn't want to admit this because Activision are kind of a dumpster fire at the best of times, and you better believe that Call of Duty Mobile has microtransactions in it that you can spend a lot of money on. But to my shock, this game is actually really good. It's like a diet Call of Duty experience where you somehow don't miss out on all that much, and the devs behind this, who also made Pokemon Unite, deserve a lot of credit. Yes, there's microtransactions, but they're not necessary for you to feel like you're making progress. And that's the best way to do them. We've got as far as number 11 without any mention of Black Ops, which is pretty goddamn impressive. Well, other than the shitty PS Vita game, and I suppose Cold War counts as well, but the Black Ops quadrilogy is some pretty tasty Call of Duty. Black Ops 3 is probably the weakest Blops, and even then we left the genuinely mediocre games behind some time ago. It plays just as well as previous Black Ops games, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of the multiplayer, but if you bought Black Ops 3 for the PS3 or Xbox 360, you were stuck with a version that had no campaign and was lacking a lot of features. We're at the point where we're splitting hairs now, that's just how it is. If you don't know your extensive Call of Duty history, then you might not know how solid the first 3 CoD games are. They're like a different language compared to where the series went after, but Call of Duty 3 is still a blast to play. I'll confess, I originally played this on the Wii, which is widely accepted to be the inferior version, but the fact that its quality still shone through shows the caliber of game we're dealing with now. This is the 3rd game in this trilogy, and you can sense that Treyarch were running out of ideas a tad, but that's only really an issue if you decide to play all 3 of these back to back. Still kicks the shit out of Medal of Honor. All the way back in 2003, the original Call of Duty was getting some work done, and it says a lot about the 20 years that followed that this game still has a place among the best 10 games in the franchise. Obviously, it's very simplistic when compared to what Call of Duty has become over the years, but this game is fascinating to play in 2023, since you get an isolated look at the values that Call of Duty used to have. Even so, it's surprising how much is here already. The multiplayer is really fun, the story is a little light but still has some great levels. You've even got the shell shock slowdown thing that's been here for decades. A lot of franchises start off shaky, but Call of Duty has had that source since the start. Do you want some more blops? Oh brother, we got loads, and the worst thing about Black Ops 4 is probably the stupid logo that completely forgets how Roman numerals work. Nah, for real, the biggest downside is the lack of a single-player campaign, which was troubling at the time since I was worried that this would be the norm going forward. But now we know that it's not, it's actually kind of nice to have a uniquely multiplayer Call of Duty game out there. You got the traditional multiplayer, an awesome zombies mode, and Blackout was a really enjoyable attempt at a battle royale. So it's not like they removed stuff for no reason. I really appreciate that World at War exists. There's a lot to unpack, but given that Call of Duty found a lot of success from pivoting away from World War II, coming back and keeping all that momentum was very valuable for ensuring that we're not just playing through the same handfuls of scenarios every time. Also, World at War may have had an awesome campaign, but you and I know why this game is remembered, and zombies is probably the best thing that Call of Duty has created. You get to shoot zombies and Nazis at the same time. You're doing the Lord's work, I swear. Okay, it's time for more blops, and Black Ops 2 is very memorable for having the largest entertainment launch of all time until GTA 5 took that honour roughly a year later. It was such an event that you wonder how the game itself could possibly meet these expectations, and it is pretty awesome for the most part. I don't agree with everything new that's added to Blops 2, but I have to give the devs credit for doing anything new, when this game was always likely to sell well regardless. It's full of non-linear gameplay and loves that player choice, so you can count me the fuck in. Call of Duty 2 was released 18 years ago, and apart from some shaky graphics which were still really good for the time, you wouldn't know it. This is a game that gave this franchise the confidence to become such a juggernaut. If CoD 1 established the formula, CoD 2 took it to new heights with bigger set plays and revamped sound design and no health bar, so you get that increasingly red screen as you take damage. And all of this helps place you right in the middle of this war. It's immersive and gritty and also incredibly fun to the point of pushing the boundaries of its hardware. It's not just about shooting Nazis anymore, now you're living every moment of this war. Does anyone else remember a time when Modern Warfare 3 was seen as a big disappointment? That's me definitely showing my age, because the first two Modern Warfares are so good that the third game was always likely to be the relatively awkward end to the trilogy. It's kind of like Call of Duty 3 in a way, but to a much higher standard, where the devs are scraping the bottom of the barrel for ideas, but the barrel was full of gold and is still pulling out some incredible moments for Modern Warfare 3. The campaign is super satisfying and the multiplayer soaked up so much of my time that it's probably why I did so bad at school. I'm not going to think too hard about it and say it was worth it. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the original Blops is indeed the best Blops around, and for so many, this is just straight up the best Call of Duty game ever made. Not me, but it is one of the more consistently amazing games in the franchise, where you can feel the devs flexing their creative muscles in a successful effort to create something unique and deeply memorable. There's a huge amount of variety on display that keeps you company throughout an engrossing story mode, and the multiplayer is so addictive that you'll never get anything done, and the zombies has JFK say this line, "Gentlemen, lock and load." So it's an instant classic. At this time, Call of Duty was one of the best FPS franchises around, and Black Ops came out swinging. We're 30 games down now, and I'm running out of ways of introducing video games, but do you remember when... Oh yeah, how could we forget? Modern Warfare 2 is often remembered more for its controversies than its qualities, which is a damn shame because it has way more of the latter than the former. If anything, the controversies helped to garner more attention and brought in the public en masse to help enjoy just a 10 out of 10 experience from start to finish. The campaign's a bit short and can suffer a tad from being the awkward middle child of the canon, but the individual missions are just so fantastic that I don't really care. The online is as good, if not better, than anything that came before, and not just from this franchise. It's a titan of the genre and the industry. And yet in my eyes still not the best, because the first Modern Warfare, and indeed what is now the original Modern Warfare these days, is the pinnacle of modern FPSs. I'll start with the multiplayer because this is what broke new ground, and it was loved by so many and for so long that this is basically the reason why the franchise is as popular as it is. Credit to Activision for following up on the success and keeping the train going, because people poured so much of their time into this multiplayer that it's still going strong to this day. The campaign is one of my favourite story modes of any video game and hits shockingly hard for a franchise that gained a reputation for glorifying combat and violence. It's uncompromising and yet hugely varied with its locations and setups. Frankly, I envy anyone watching this video who hasn't played Modern Warfare yet. It'll do everything for you. And after that, we're done! Do you agree, or would you have another Call of Duty game on top? Let me know in a comment down below, and be sure to like the video and hit subscribe for more videos, and hit that bell for notifications of new uploads. Last week I talked about games that shut down their studios, so go watch that, and I want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Blue Caterade, The Green Scorpion, and Fusion Warrior. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.